She screamed those words like knives, each one cutting deeper than I thought I could survive. Asterisk, you ruined my life. Asterisk, that was the last thing I heard before the door slammed and everything I loved walked out. But what no one tells you is how a voice like that stays inside your chest. How even in silence, it echoes. I carried her anger like a shadow, but I also carried her laughter, her touch, the way she once looked at me like I was her whole world. And now, after all the storms and scars, she's whispering my name again, not in rage, but against my skin. I remember the sound of her voice more than the words themselves, but that night it was impossible to separate the two. She screamed, her chest heaving, eyes wet, face red with the kind of pain only love can carve into someone's skin. You ruined my life. It was not just a sentence, it was a weapon thrown across the small space between us, and I felt it tear through everything inside me. I stood frozen, helpless, my throat tight, my hands shaking as if they didn't belong to me. I wanted to answer, to defend myself, to tell her that I never meant to hurt her, that all I ever wanted was to hold her close and make her feel safe, but the words died in my mouth. Her anger was bigger than my voice that night, and all I could do was watch her walk away. The door slammed, and the sound echoed like a gunshot. Silence fell heavy, too heavy, as if even the air was punishing me for letting her slip away. I sank to the floor, numb, unable to cry yet feeling like I was drowning. My chest hurt with the weight of what she had said, the words repeating in a loop until I couldn't breathe. I thought if I closed my eyes, I'd wake up and find it was just another one of those nightmares I'd been having about losing her. But it wasn't. It was real, and I had to carry it. The days that followed blurred together. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, hearing her voice in the darkness. You ruined my life. Sometimes I would whisper back, as if she could hear me through the walls, no, I ruined mine too. I tried to replay every moment that led us here, searching for the exact second love had twisted into hate. Was it in the silence between our conversations? Was it in the way I pulled back when she wanted me close? Or was it the world pressing against us until we both cracked under the pressure? The questions never stopped, and none of them had answers that made the ache go away. Every corner of the apartment felt haunted. The couch where we once curled up together became a cold reminder of what I had lost. The bed smelled faintly of her perfume, and I couldn't bring myself to change the sheets. Even the kitchen mocked me. I saw her smile in the coffee cups, heard her laughter in the sound of boiling water. She was everywhere and nowhere all at once, and it drove me to madness. I started walking late at night, wandering the streets just to escape the suffocating stillness of home. Street lights hummed above me, and the world seemed indifferent to my heartbreak. Couples passed by hand in hand, their laughter spilling into the night, and each sound pierced me with envy and longing. I wanted to reach out to strangers and tell them, hold on to her. Don't let her go. You don't know how quickly love can turn into silence. But of course, I never did. I walked with my head down, letting the memories play in my mind until I felt both sick and addicted to the pain. Sometimes anger replaced the sadness, and I hated her for the words she had thrown at me. I thought, asterisk, how could she say that? After everything we shared, after every night I held her when she was breaking, after every promise we whispered in the dark, how could she reduce me to nothing more than a mistake, asterisk, but the anger never lasted. It always dissolved back into longing, because beneath it all, I still loved her. I loved her in a way that made no sense, in a way that hurt more than it healed, in a way that left me crawling back to the memory of her even when I knew it was killing me. There were nights I swore I hated her, that I wanted her erased from my veins. I'd tear up the photos, throw her clothes into bags, slam cupboards shut as if the noise could drown her out. But then I'd catch sight of her handwriting on a note she left me once, or hear the song we used to dance to alone in the living room, and the hatred would collapse into tears. I would clutch the note to my chest, crumpled and wet, and whisper, come back. Please come back. No one ever heard me. The walls held my secrets, and I was left to carry a love that felt like both poison and medicine. Sleep was no escape either. Dreams dragged me back to her arms, to the warmth of her lips against mine, to the softness of her body curled against me. And then I'd wake, empty, reaching for someone who wasn't there. The mornings were the hardest, because daylight left no room for illusions. The bed was cold. The apartment was silent. And she was gone. Still, no matter how much it hurt, I couldn't stop clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she thought of me too. Maybe the words she screamed weren't the whole truth. Maybe beneath the anger there was still love, buried under pain, waiting to breathe again, and that was the cruelest part. I could not hate her, even if I tried. The sound of her voice, the memory of her touch, the light in her eyes when she used to look at me, those things refused to leave. I carried them like scars under my skin, and no matter what she had said, no matter how loud the words had been, I couldn't silence the truth that I still loved her. I loved her when I shouldn't, when it hurt, when it made no sense at all. And deep down, a part of me believed she still loved me too, even if she was too broken to admit it. Because love doesn't just disappear. It hides. It waits. It whispers beneath the screams, aching to be heard again. I still remember the first time I saw her. It wasn't dramatic or staged by fate in some grand way, but something about the moment lodged itself into my memory so deeply that even now it feels like yesterday. She was standing by the window in a crowded cafe, sunlight spilling through the glass and painting her skin in soft gold. She wasn't even looking at me, her eyes were buried in a book, her lips curled slightly as though the words on the page belonged to her alone. My heart stumbled, confused, like it had tripped over something invisible. I didn't even know her name, but I felt it, that quiet shift in the universe that whispers, "Pay attention, your life is about to change." It started small. I went back to that cafe more often than I ever had before, pretending it was about the coffee, but secretly hoping to see her again. And every time I did, it felt like being pulled closer to something I couldn't explain. The first time our eyes met, I looked away too quickly, but not before I caught the flicker of curiosity in hers. The second time, she smiled, a soft, hesitant curve that made me feel like the world had suddenly tilted. By the third time, it was impossible not to speak. My voice trembled when I asked if I could sit beside her, and she nodded like she had been waiting. Conversations grew from there, awkward at first, both of us cautious, like children testing water with bare toes. But then the walls fell. We talked about books, about music, about dreams we were too afraid to say aloud to anyone else. We laughed until the cafe closed and the workers politely nudged us out into the night. And when we parted ways, I couldn't sleep, because her voice echoed in my ears, soft and warm, like she had planted herself in me and refused to let go. The first time we touched was accidental. My hand brushed against hers as we both reached for the same mug, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she let it linger, her skin against mine, her thumb grazing softly over my knuckles as if she was asking a question without words. I answered by not moving, by letting the silence stretch, by letting the air between us thrum with unspoken things. From that moment on, I craved her touch in ways I had never craved anything. When our lips finally met, it was as if the whole world stopped. There was no cafe, no noise, no city humming in the background. There was just her breath against mine, her lips trembling slightly, her hands curling into my shirt as if holding me anchored her to the earth. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what people write poems about. This is what I was waiting for without even knowing it. And in that kiss, I felt not just desire, but recognition, like my soul had found something it lost long ago. But with every step forward, the world seemed determined to push us back. Loving her wasn't simple. It never could be. Outside of our little bubble, there were eyes that judged, voices that whispered, and families that didn't understand. She struggled more than I did, her parents were strict, her friends carried opinions sharpened like knives, and I could see the fear in her whenever she reached for my hand in public. Sometimes she'd let go too quickly, and though I tried to understand, it always left me aching. She wanted to be brave, I knew she did, but bravery in the face of hate is heavy, and we were both too young to carry it all. The cracks began in silence. We stopped talking as much about the things that mattered. She began bottling her fears, hiding them behind smiles I knew weren't real. I began pulling away too, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how to ease her burden. Our love was there, burning fiercely, but it was caged, suffocated by all the weight pressing down on us. Arguments crept in slowly, sharp words slipping out when exhaustion and fear boiled over. Sometimes it was about nothing at all, a forgotten call, a careless tone, a misread glance. Other times it was about everything, the future, the pressure, the pain of trying to fit a love so wide into a world so small. And then there was that night, the night that lives inside me like a scar. I don't even remember what started the fight. It began with a spark, a small disagreement, but it spread too fast, too wild, until both of us were yelling things we didn't mean. I remember her eyes glistening, her voice breaking, her words sharp enough to wound me in ways I didn't know I could be wounded. And then she screamed it, the sentence that shattered everything, "You ruined my life." The silence that followed was louder than the scream itself. We stood staring at each other, both broken, both breathing hard, and then she left. She left without looking back, without giving me the chance to explain, without letting me hold her one last time. That was the night everything changed. The night the girl who once whispered my name with love spat it out with hate. The night I realized that sometimes, the same love that feels like salvation can also feel like destruction. And though I tried to tell myself she was gone, that I should move on, that I should bury her voice and find peace, I couldn't. Because no matter how deep her anger cut, no matter how heavy the silence grew, she was still the only person my heart refused to let go of. The days after she left turned into weeks, and the weeks stretched into months, yet the ache inside me never softened. At first I tried to convince myself I could move on. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office until exhaustion forced me to sleep. I told my friends I was fine, plastered on smiles that never reached my eyes, and nodded when they said, "Time heals everything." But time didn't heal. It just made the silence louder. Every corner of my life seemed to carry her fingerprints. I avoided the cafe where we first met, yet whenever I passed by another coffee shop, my chest tightened, remembering how she used to take her drink with too much sugar and laugh about it. I stopped walking in the park where we used to sit, but when I saw strangers lying on the grass, heads resting on each other's shoulders, I felt that familiar sting of jealousy and grief. No matter where I went, there was no escape. She lived in my world even when she wasn't an it.my friends tried to distract me. They dragged me out for dinners, movies, and nights that blurred into noise and drinks. I sat among them, listening to their laughter, pretending to be a part of it, but the truth was I felt like a ghost among the living. I watched couples lean close to whisper in each other's ears, watched women touch hands across tables, and every time my chest burned. They told me to delete her number, to block her on social media, to cut her out of my life completely. I tried. I really did. But no matter how many times I hovered over the delete button, I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like erasing the last proof that she had ever been mine, and I wasn't ready for that kind of emptiness. At first, I thought she was moving on. I saw photos of her with friends, smiling in ways that seemed effortless. I heard she was dating, and the news crushed me, even though I had no right to be jealous. I told myself it was good, that she deserved to be happy, that maybe someone else could give her the peace I couldn't. But late at night, when I scrolled through pictures of her face, I saw it, an emptiness in her eyes that mirrored mine. Her smile looked practiced, her laugh a little too sharp. I knew her too well to be fooled. Beneath it all, she was hurting too. I kept asking myself whether love could survive what had happened. Could it survive being called poison? Could it survive being blamed for someone's brokenness? Or was it already gone, buried under anger and regret? Every time I asked, the answer shifted. One moment, I swore it was over. The next, I felt it beating in me stronger than ever. Then came the day fate decided to test me. I was walking through the city, lost in my own thoughts, when I saw her. She was standing across the street, her hair tied back, her hands clutching a bag, her body turned as if she were about to leave. The world slowed. My breath caught. It had been months since I had last seen her face up close, and yet it felt like no time had passed at all. Her eyes lifted, searching the crowd, and then they landed on me. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The cars, the people, the noise, they all faded. It was just us, two broken souls locked in a silence that spoke louder than any scream. I wanted to run to her, to pull her into my arms, to say all the things I had bottled up. But my feet wouldn't move. I stood there, afraid, unsure, and so did she. Our eyes held, and in them I saw everything, the love we had, the pain we caused, the words left unsaid. It was as if her gaze was asking me if I still loved her, and my silence was screaming yes. Then the light changed, the cars moved, and the moment ended. She looked away first, clutching her bag tighter, and turned down the street. My heart dropped as I watched her walk away, but something in me shifted. That look had told me more than months of silence ever could. She wasn't over me. She wasn't free of what we had. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed her face over and over, the way her eyes softened when they met mine, the hesitation in her body. It wasn't indifference. It wasn't hate. It was longing, the same longing I felt every day. For the first time in months, hope crept back into my chest, fragile and terrifying. Because if she still felt it, maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe love, even broken and bruised, could still find a way back. Seeing her again left me restless, as if the air around me had shifted and I couldn't breathe the same way anymore. The look in her eyes haunted me more than her scream ever had. It wasn't filled with hate like that night. It wasn't even anger. It was something softer, something aching, something she tried to hide but couldn't. I carried it with me everywhere, on the train to work, while standing in line for groceries, even while brushing my teeth in the mirror. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her staring back at me, silent, broken, and familiar. That kind of silence is louder than any fight, louder than any goodbye. It spoke of unfinished things, of words swallowed, of feelings that refused to die. After that day, it was as if the city itself wanted us to collide. I started noticing her everywhere, at the bookstore near my office, walking across the park where I used to avoid going, even sitting 2 rows behind me on the bus one evening. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but it happened too often, too precisely, for me to believe it was just chance. We never spoke, never even exchanged more than a lingering glance, but every time our eyes met, the world seemed to pause. There was always this moment where I felt she wanted to say something, that she was on the edge of reaching out, but then pride or fear pulled her back. And the same thing held me still. We were 2 people orbiting each other, afraid of what would happen if one of us dared to cross the space between. I tried to convince myself it was better this way. That we had both been hurt too deeply to risk tearing open those wounds again. I told myself we had said enough, that our silence was safer than the chaos we created when we were together. But the truth was I couldn't stop craving her voice. Even when it was sharp, even when it broke me, it was the only voice that had ever felt like home. And now, with her so close yet untouchable, the craving grew unbearable. One evening, after running into her yet again at a little convenience store, I came home and sat in the dark for hours. I kept replaying the tiny things, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her fingers trembled when she reached for the change, the way her shoulders stiffened when she realized I was there. It wasn't indifference. No, indifference is clean, final, cold. What I saw in her was Messier. It was the kind of hesitation that only exists when feelings haven't died. I sat there, gripping my knees, whispering to myself, she still cares. I know she does. And for the first time in so long, it didn't feel like a lie, but pride is a stubborn wall. Neither of us dared to break it. I kept thinking about that last night, about the words she threw at me like stones, and fear choked me. What if I reached out and she screamed again? What if she truly believed I ruined her life, and everything I saw in her eyes was just my imagination? The thought of reopening myself to that kind of rejection terrified me. So I stayed silent, and I hated myself for it. Still, fate has a cruel way of dragging the truth out, whether you're ready or not. One night, long after I had given up on sleeping, my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was one of those pointless notifications. But then I glanced at the screen, and my heart stuttered. Her name. After all this time, after months of silence, after all the nights I had stared at her number wondering if I should reach out, she had written first. The message was short. Just a single line, asterisk, I don't know why, but I keep seeing you everywhere. Asterisk, my hands shook as I read it over and over, afraid that if I blinked it might disappear. It wasn't much. It wasn't an apology, or a confession, or even a question. But it was her. It was her breaking the silence, her admitting that she noticed me too, that I wasn't the only one caught in this pull. I stared at the words until my vision blurred, tears welling up because I realized something. I hadn't lost her completely. Not yet. Somewhere in the middle of her anger and my grief, something had survived. Something small, fragile, but alive. I didn't reply right away. I sat there in the dark, clutching the phone to my chest, trembling at the thought of what this could mean. Was this the beginning of healing, or another wound waiting to happen? I didn't know. All I knew was that her silence had ended, and in that single moment, my world cracked open just enough to let hope breathe again. I stared at her message for what felt like hours, the glow of the phone burning into my eyes, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't untangle. A simple line, only a few words, but it was enough to tear apart the silence that had swallowed us for so long. She saw me. She noticed. She admitted it. My fingers hovered above the screen a dozen times, typing and erasing, scared of saying too much, scared of saying too little. In the end, I wrote back the truth, the only thing I could manage without breaking into pieces. Asterisk, I keep seeing you too. Asterisk, the moment I pressed send, I felt like my heart was going to beat out of my chest. I waited for hours, but no reply came that night. Sleep was impossible. Every creak in the apartment sounded louder, every second stretched painfully. My mind kept circling back to her face, her eyes, her silence. Maybe she regretted reaching out. Maybe it was a mistake. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. She had opened a door, even if just a crack, and I wasn't going to let it close again. The next day passed in a haze. I checked my phone constantly, unable to focus on anything else. I replayed our past in my head, the warmth, the laughter, the love that felt too big to fade. By evening, my phone buzzed again. This time her words were longer, hesitant but real. Asterisk, I don't know what I want from this. But maybe we should talk. I can't keep pretending I don't feel anything when I see you. Asterisk, I sat down hard, knees weak, the tears already spilling before I could stop them. She wasn't over me. She hadn't erased me from her heart. For months I had convinced myself it was one-sided, that she hated me, that love had turned completely into rage. And yet here it was, proof that the bond we had was still there, fragile but alive. We agreed to meet at a small cafe far from the places we used to go together, a place with no memories clinging to the walls. When I walked in, my hands trembled, and my breath felt shallow. She was already there, sitting at a corner table, her hair tied up, her eyes restless. When she looked up at me, it was like all the time apart disappeared and yet left its scars on both of us. Her eyes softened, but there was a storm inside them too. I slid into the seat across from her, the silence between us heavy, weighted with everything unsaid. It was awkward at first. We spoke about meaningless things, the weather, the coffee, the noise of the cafe, as if avoiding the truth could hold it back. But the truth pressed in anyway. Eventually, she sighed, her hands curling around her cup, and said quietly, I regret how it ended. My throat closed up at her words. For so long I had carried her scream like a wound, like a curse I couldn't shake. Hearing her admit regret made the air shift inside me. I asked her, my voice unsteady, "Did you mean it? That night? When you said I ruined your life?" Her face broke then, eyes wet, lips trembling. She shook her head slowly. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I was angry. I was drowning. And you were the only one close enough to throw it at. I thought if I pushed you away, it would hurt less than waiting for you to leave me first." Her honesty shattered me in a different way. I had spent months believing I had destroyed her, that I had been nothing more than a mistake in her story. To hear that it was fear, not hate, that fueled her words made my chest ache. I whispered back, "I never wanted to leave. I never stopped loving you, not even when I tried to hate you." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking, and for the first time since everything broke, we cried together. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't poetic. It was raw, messy, the kind of crying that comes from carrying too much for too long, between tears, confessions spilled. She told me about the pressure from her family, how they made her feel torn in half, how she was terrified of choosing between me and them. She admitted that sometimes she hated herself for not being stronger, for letting the world dictate how much of our love she could hold. And I told her about my loneliness, about how I tried to move on but every face blurred into hers, how even in anger I still whispered her name at night. The weight between us began to lift, little by little, as we finally said the things we had been too afraid to before. By the time the cafe was closing, we were holding hands across the table, fingers hesitant at first but then steady, clinging as if afraid to let go again. There was no kiss, no grand gesture. Just two broken souls trying to find the courage to believe in each other again. When we walked out, the night was cold, but she let me walk beside her, close enough for our shoulders to brush. At her stop, she paused, looked at me with eyes full of exhaustion and longing, and whispered, "I don't know if we can fix this. But I don't want to pretend I don't need you anymore." Those words stayed with me long after she left. They weren't a promise, not yet. They weren't forgiveness or certainty. But they were something better than silence, they were a beginning. And for the first time since she screamed those words at me, I believed we might still have a chance to rewrite what was broken. The days after that meeting felt different, as if the air between us had shifted. We didn't rush into anything, but there was a new thread connecting us again, fragile yet undeniable. We began to see each other quietly, cautiously, as if afraid to scare the moment away. Sometimes it was just a walk through the city at night, saying little but feeling everything. Other times it was sitting across from each other at small diners, both of us stirring cups we barely drank from, our eyes drifting to each other more than to the food in front of us. The world outside didn't know what was happening, and maybe that was best. What mattered was that for the first time in months, we weren't strangers anymore. At first, it was strange to be near her again. My heart would pound whenever she laughed, and my throat would tighten when her hand brushed against mine. Everything felt new, but also familiar, as if I had been holding my breath and could finally inhale again. She seemed softer too, less guarded, though I could still see the caution in her eyes. Sometimes she would look at me like she was afraid of falling, like she wanted to trust but didn't know if the ground would hold. I understood, because I felt the same. Love can survive absence, but rebuilding trust is slower, more delicate, like learning to walk again after breaking your legs. There were moments of lightness, moments where the weight of the past seemed to fall away. One evening, we sat on a bench near the river, and she began telling me about little things, about a book she was reading, about a song she couldn't stop listening to. I remember watching her talk, her hands moving as she grew animated, her eyes sparkling the way they used to. I didn't even hear half of what she said because I was so lost in the beauty of seeing her like that again. When she caught me staring, she blushed and laughed, nudging me with her shoulder. It was such a small gesture, but my heart clenched with joy, because it felt like we were finding our way back to each other piece by piece, but it wasn't always light. The past still lingered, and sometimes it slipped into our conversations like shadows. One night she admitted, voice low and trembling, that she was terrified of us repeating the same mistakes. "What if we can't do this? What if we just hurt each other again?" she whispered, eyes glassy. I wanted to tell her I had no doubts, that I believed in us completely, but the truth is I was scared too. Instead, I reached for her hand and held it tightly. "Then we learn this time. We don't run, we don't scream, we talk, even when it hurts." She nodded slowly, and though fear still lingered, there was also something else in her gaze, hope. We weren't healed yet. There were still nights when I caught her pulling away, lost in thoughts she didn't share. There were still moments when I almost said too much and stopped myself, afraid of breaking what we were building. But despite all of it, we kept showing up. That was what mattered. Every message, every call, every quiet meeting reminded me that we hadn't given up, that neither of us had truly walked away. What struck me most was how much we still knew each other, even after all the distance. She still ordered her coffee too sweet. She still hummed under her breath when she was nervous. She still tilted her head when she was trying not to cry, like she could hold the tears back by force. And I realized I hadn't forgotten a single detail, because love doesn't erase like that. It burrows deep, holding on even when everything else collapses. One evening, we ended up at my apartment for the first time since everything fell apart. It felt surreal to see her there again, sitting on the couch that had once been our safe place. She looked around quietly, her eyes landing on the shelf where her favorite book still sat. I had never moved it. When she picked it up and held it in her hands, her fingers tracing the worn spine, I felt something shift between us. She glanced at me, tears threatening to spill, and whispered, "I didn't think I'd ever sit here again." I walked over, sat beside her, and whispered back, "I never stopped waiting for you." She leaned into me then, resting her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in so long, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. My arms wrapped around her, not tightly, not desperately, but gently, as if reminding her I was here. I wasn't letting go this time. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand slid against mine, our fingers intertwining slowly, naturally, like they always belonged that way. We didn't kiss that night, and maybe that was important. We didn't need to rush. What we shared was fragile, and we both knew it. The healing wasn't finished, but we were choosing it, moment by moment. She was still afraid, and so was I, but we were both learning to believe again, to trust again, to breathe in each other's presence without drowning in the past. As I held her against me, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to before. We weren't the same people we had been before everything broke. We were scarred, bruised, and hesitant, but maybe that was what made us stronger. Love hadn't abandoned us, it had simply been waiting, buried beneath the wreckage, for us to find the courage to uncover it. And as she whispered my name softly into the quiet room, not in anger but with something almost tender, I knew I would do whatever it took to keep this second chance alive. It happened slowly at first, like the soft thaw of ice after a long winter, a warmth creeping back into places we had both thought were frozen forever. We spent more time together now, no longer only in cafes or on city streets, but in spaces that mattered, spaces that once carried the weight of our love. Every time she stepped into my apartment, the silence that used to crush me felt lighter, less hostile. She laughed more often, sometimes at nothing, and when she did, her laughter unlocked memories of the girl I once held close on nights when the world felt too heavy. Yet even as we rebuilt, there was always a trembling hesitation in both of us, as if we were standing at the edge of something too powerful, afraid of what would happen if we let ourselves fall all the way back in. The night it finally happened, there was no plan, no warning. She came over after work, tired but smiling, a paper bag in her hands with takeout she knew I liked. We ate together on the couch, our legs brushing, our conversations weaving between the present and the past. At one point she grew quiet, her fingers playing with the straw in her drink, her eyes far away. Do you ever think about that night? She asked softly, and I knew exactly which night she meant. My chest tightened, but I didn't look away. Every day, I admitted. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes but not falling yet. I hated myself after. I hated what I said to you. I thought I broke everything. Her voice cracked, and in that moment the walls we had been hiding behind for months crumbled. I reached for her hand, and she let me take it, our fingers trembling together as if both our bodies knew what our mouths had been too afraid to say. The conversation poured out of us then, raw and unfiltered. She told me about the nights she couldn't sleep, about how she had whispered my name into the dark even when she swore she was done with me. She confessed that every new face she tried to welcome into her life blurred into mine, that no matter how far she ran, I was still there, haunting her in ways she didn't know how to escape. I told her about the silence I carried, how her scream had echoed in me until I thought I would go mad, how I hated her for it and yet still loved her more than anything. There were tears, real and heavy, but this time we didn't cry alone. We cried together, leaning into each other, letting our pain mingle until it no longer felt like mine or hers but ours, something shared, something we could finally start to set down. When the tears softened into silence, she lifted her face to mine. Her eyes were searching, desperate, terrified and full of longing all at once. And before I could speak, she whispered, barely audible, "I still love you." Those 4 words broke me open. Every wall I had built, every fear I had clung to, every doubt that had eaten at me dissolved in that moment. I cupped her face in my hands, my thumbs brushing her damp cheeks, and whispered back, "I never stopped." The kiss that followed wasn't rushed or wild, it was slow, tender, filled with the weight of everything we had been through. It was an apology, a confession, a vow. Her lips trembled against mine, and I felt her whole body melt as if she had been waiting for this, for us, to finally come back to life. The night deepened around us, and we let ourselves surrender. There was no anger left, no fear sharp enough to hold us apart. We moved carefully at first, touching each other like fragile glass, afraid to break what had just been mended. But the longer we held on, the more the hesitation dissolved, replaced by a hunger that had been buried too long. She whispered my name over and over, this time not in rage but in reverence, each sound of it against my skin undoing months of loneliness. Every kiss, every touch felt like reclaiming something we thought we had lost forever. Our bodies remembered what our hearts had been aching for. It wasn't just desire, it was belonging, it was coming home. Lying beside her afterward, tangled in sheets that once felt like a coffin of absence but now carried her warmth again, I couldn't stop watching her. She traced small circles on my arm, her eyes soft but full of exhaustion, not the tiredness of despair but the kind that comes after a storm when you finally rest. "I was so afraid you'd hate me forever," she whispered, and I kissed her forehead gently, answering, "I was afraid you'd never forgive me." She shook her head, her lips brushing my chest as she said, "There's nothing to forgive." We were both hurting. We both broke. But somehow, we're still here. In that quiet moment, I realized that love doesn't always look like perfection or endless joy. Sometimes it looks like surviving the worst together and still choosing each other afterward. Sometimes it looks like whispers after screams, like holding tighter when you're scared, like learning to breathe again in the arms of the person who once shattered you. As she drifted off to sleep against me, her breath warm on my skin, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace. Not the fragile kind that breaks at the first sign of trouble, but the kind that grows when 2 hearts decide they're done running, done hiding, done pretending. And I knew, as I held her close, that no matter what battles still waited outside, we had finally found our way back. She had once screamed that I ruined her life, but now, with her whispering my name in the quiet night, I understood the truth. We had both saved each other, even through the pain, even through the breaking. And this time, we weren't going to let go. The morning after felt like waking up in a different world, one where the sharp edges of the past had been softened by the warmth of her lying next to me. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, spilling over her hair, turning it into a halo I wanted to drown in forever. For a moment, I didn't move, afraid that if I breathed too loud, it would all vanish like a dream. But then she stirred, turning toward me, her eyes half-lidded with sleep, and smiled, a real smile, soft and unguarded, the kind I thought I'd never see from her again. My chest ached at the sight because it was proof that despite everything we had broken, we had pieced something back together. She whispered good morning in a voice so tender it felt like forgiveness itself, and I realized that was the moment I had been waiting for since the night she screamed those words at me. The day didn't rush us. We lingered in the quiet, wrapped in the cocoon of our rediscovered closeness. It wasn't about grand gestures or declarations, it was about the small things we once took for granted. She stole sips from my coffee, wrinkled her nose when it was too bitter, and then laughed as if the world hadn't nearly torn us apart. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, and instead of pulling away like she might have weeks ago, she leaned into my touch. Every second was proof that we were no longer standing on opposite sides of an unbridgeable canyon. We had crossed it, scarred but alive. Later, we walked outside together, hand in hand, something we hadn't dared to do in so long. The city was the same, cars rushing, people busy with their own lives, but everything looked different through the lens of her fingers laced with mine. We didn't speak much, but we didn't need to. The silence was comfortable now, filled with unspoken promises instead of accusations. At one point she stopped in front of a bookstore we used to visit, her eyes shining with memory. "Do you remember when you read to me here because I was too tired to keep my eyes open?" she asked, and the image came rushing back, her head on my shoulder as I stumbled through pages, doing silly voices to make her laugh. We stepped inside, and I found myself reading a few lines aloud again, my voice shaking at first, until she giggled just like before. The sound wrapped itself around my heart, binding the broken parts tighter than any apology ever could. But healing is never without its shadows. That evening, sitting across from her at my kitchen table, the weight of everything we had endured crept back in. She grew quiet, her fork moving food around her plate without lifting it. I reached for her hand, but she hesitated before finally meeting my gaze. "What if we ruin this again?" she whispered. Her voice cracked, and I saw the fear swimming just beneath the surface of her love. It would have been easy to feed her a perfect answer, to tell her nothing would ever hurt again, but that would have been a lie. So instead, I squeezed her hand and said, "Then we don't give up this time. We face the cracks before they become breaks. We fight for it instead of walking away." She stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for something solid, and then she exhaled shakily, nodding as tears slipped down her cheeks. When I kissed them away, she whispered against my lips, "I'll fight. I don't want to lose you again." That night, we didn't just share love, we shared resolve. We lay together in the dark, talking about the hard things we had avoided for so long. We admitted our fears, our insecurities, our mistakes. She confessed how lonely she felt even in a crowded room without me, and I confessed how I punished myself every day for not holding on tighter when things began to fall apart. It was raw and painful, but every word stitched us closer together. By the time dawn hinted at the horizon, we weren't just two people clinging to a memory of what we once had, we were building something new, fragile but real, honest and alive. The weeks that followed were not perfect, but they were ours. We argued sometimes, voices rising, the past pressing its claws into us, but we didn't shatter like before. We learned to stop, to listen, to remember that love wasn't about avoiding storms but standing together in the rain. We found new rituals, new ways of being close. Sunday mornings became sacred, with pancakes she always burned and laughter echoing through my small kitchen. Long drives at night gave us space to talk, to dream, to breathe. The world outside didn't understand what we had survived, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was beside me again, no longer a ghost haunting my memories but flesh and warmth, a heartbeat in rhythm with mine. The most unexpected moment came one evening when we walked by the river where everything had once begun. She pulled me close, her eyes shimmering with something deeper than nostalgia. "You remember the first time we kissed here?" she asked. I nodded, my chest tight with the memory. "Back then, I thought you'd be the love of my life," she whispered, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard, afraid to breathe as she continued, "And now I know I was right." My heart broke and healed all at once at her words. I kissed her with everything inside me, not the desperation of holding on but the certainty of belonging. When she whispered my name against my skin again, soft and reverent, I realized the circle had closed. The scream that once tore us apart had transformed into a whisper that rebuilt us. We were not the same people we had been before the breaking. We carried scars, but we also carried strength. She no longer screamed in anger, and I no longer drowned in silence. Instead, we whispered promises in the quiet of night, our voices weaving a future we were determined to protect. Love had burned us, shattered us, remade us, but in the end, it had chosen us again. And as I lay with her in my arms, listening to the steady rhythm of her breath, I understood something deeper than ever before. She wasn't just the girl who once accused me of ruining her life. She was the woman who taught me that even broken hearts can learn to beat again, and that sometimes, the most powerful love stories aren't the ones without pain, but the ones that rise stronger from it.